Welcome, welcome to the class of Professor S.K. Paul, Head of the Department of English, BRA, Bihar University, Muzaffarpur. Dear students of PG Semester 3, CC 10, Unit 1, Modern Poetry. Dear students, today I am going to deliver my lecture on allusions and symbols in Eliot's poetry. I repeat, allusions and symbols in Eliot's poetry. T.S. Eliot, as a literary critic, was profoundly influenced by the symbolists after he read Arthur Symons' book, The Symbolist Movement in Literature, which was published in the year 1899. An introduction to the French literature. He himself acknowledged afterwards that it was through the study of this book that he got familiar with such great symbolists like Verlaine, Rimbaud, Jules Lafog, and Tristan Corbière. He as a poet was influenced by Lafog in the matter of style, content, and technique, whereas his spirit was greatly influenced by Baudelaire. He was so so much influenced by the critical abilities of Remy de Gourmont that he went to the extent of saying that perhaps Remy de Gourmont had most of the general intelligence of Aristotle. So it is apparent that Eliot was profoundly influenced by the symbolists and later on he derived most of his ideas and concepts from them, especially from the study of Lafog. Eliot is so much influenced by the symbolists that he derives most from them the ideas, the characters, the situations, the moods, the phrases, and even the titles of his work. He is influenced by Lafog's methods, style, and viewpoints. The term objective correlative itself has the echo of symbolism. He draws symbols from the background of literary tradition. His symbols are prosaic, poetic, grand, material, abstract, metaphysical, and spiritual. The terseness of his phrases is completely found to be in the manner of Lafog. Uh, this lecture attempts to establish that Eliot formulated the concepts of objective correlative and dissociation of sensibility under the influence of the French symbolists. Metaphysical poetry also influenced his writings. The lecture also reiterates that some of Eliot's critical concepts were not original. Dissociation of sensibility. Ian Housby, in the Wordsworth Companion to Literature in English, describes symbolism as a term specifically applied to the works of the 19th century French writers. He reacted against the descriptive precision and objectivity of realism and the scientific determinism of naturalism. Symbolist movement in France began with Baudelaire's Fleurs du Mal, 1857, and was continued by such major poets as Rimbaud, Verlaine, Mallarmé, and Valéry. In poetry, symbolism was a reaction against the descriptive precision of objectivity of the Parnassians. The symbolists stressed the priority of suggestion and evocation over direct description and explicit analogy. Mallarmé's dictum Pinder non la chose, mais I effectue el produit. It is written in French, and the symbol was ascribed a preeminent function of the effort to distill a private mood or to evoke the subtle affinities which were held to exist between the material and the spiritual worlds. Ian Housby writes that the symbolists who also make an attempt to emphasize the primary importance of suggestions and evocation in the expression of a private mood or reverie. Symbolism thus sought to lay emphasis on the primary importance of suggestion and evocation to express a private mood or reverie. The movement tried to make poetry musical. W.K. Wimsatt Jr. and Clint Brooks write that it was an effort to bring poetry to the condition of music and also an attempt to reflect abstract and spiritual reality. Symbolism thus means connotation. It is a means by which the symbolists achieved their end through suggestions and connotations. It sought to spiritualize literature and find out a relation between the material and spiritual worlds. The symbol was held to evoke subtle relations and affinities, especially between sound, sense, and color, and between the material and spiritual worlds. The symbolists had a strange amalgamation of spirituality, occultism, abstract and mystical writings. The movement that began in France had a far-reaching effect upon the Russian and the English poets and critics and many others too. The techniques of the French symbolists who exploited private symbols in a poetry of rich suggestiveness rather than explicit statement had an immense influence throughout Europe and especially in the 1890s and later in England and America as well, on poets such as Arthur Symonds, Ernest Dawson, Yeats, Eliot, Pound, Dylan Thomas, Hart Crane, E. Cummings, and Wallace Stevens. English poets and critics were also profoundly influenced by the symbolist movement, and poets and writers like T. E. Hulme, Ezra Pound, T. S. Eliot, W. B. Yeats, James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, Wallace Stevens, and some others pioneered symbolism in English literature. Symbolists sought to suggest, evoke, or connote through images what it actually can be described by the means of language. Symbols were used to suggest more than what was possible to express in words. These were used to make an uncommon idea about common. Symbolism did not get confined in poetry only, rather it got spread to other forms of art too, especially painting. Symbols made poetry more musical with its stress upon rhythm, and it in its turn lent sweetness to poetry and made it melodious. A symbol in the broadest sense of the term is anything which signifies something else. In this sense, all words are symbols, as commonly used in discussing literature. However, symbol is applied only to a word or set of words that signifies an object or event which itself signifies something else. That is, the words refer to something which suggests a range of reference beyond itself. Symbolism, thus, through use of connotative language, tried to evoke the image of a particular idea by using some external agents. It spiritualized literature and broadened the scope of imagination. It brought to the light the unknown, dark, and mysterious, and thus brought delight to the readers and embellished the language and style of literature tremendously. In France, The chief exponents of symbolism were Stephen Mallarmé, Rémy de Gourmont, Paul Verlaine, Jean-Nicolas Arthur-Rimbaud, Jules Lafaux, Edward Dujardin, Charles Pierce Baudelaire, and Marcel Schroep. Mallarmé's later on came to be regarded as the saint and sage of symbolist movement. T.S. Eliot too became a part of the symbolist movement in England after Ezra Pound introduced him to the leading and great writers of his age. It is through Pound that Eliot met E.M. Forster, D.H. Lawrence, Wyndham Lewis, and Ford Madox Ford, W.B. Yeats, James Joyce, and others who shaped and molded his concept of poetry. Eliot was profoundly influenced by the symbolists after he had Arthur Symons' book, The Symbolist Movement in Literature, published in 1899. An introduction to the French literature. He himself acknowledged afterwards that Arthur Symons' book had affected the course of his literary life in a positive manner, and also that it was through the study of this book that he got familiar with such great symbolists like Verlaine, Rimbaud, Jules Lafaux, and Tristan Corbière. He, as a poet, was influenced by Lafaux in the matter of style, content, and technique, whereas his spirit was greatly influenced by Baudelaire. He was so much influenced by the critical abilities of Rémy de Gourmont that he went to the extent of saying that perhaps Rémy had most of the general intelligence of Aristotle. It is apparent that Eliot was profoundly influenced by the symbolists, and later on he derived most of his ideas and concepts from them, especially from the study of Lafaux. Eliot is so much influenced by the symbolists that he derives most from them the ideas, the characters, the situations, the moods, the phrases, and even the titles of his works. Marshall McLuhan, in his essay Symbolic Landscape, says that Flaubert and Baudelaire has presided the great city landscape of Ulysses, and Mr. Eliot's The Wasteland in 1922 was a new technical modulation of Ulysses, the latter of which had begun to appear in 1970. The quartets owe a great deal to Finnegan's Wake, as does the cocktail party. He is influenced by Lafaux's methods, style, and viewpoints. Hugh Kenner, in The Invisible Poet, T.S. Eliot writes that Prufrock is the sort of persona entailed by the viewpoints and methods of Lafaux, and adds that the moods which are affectingly self-constrained, the speaker imprisoned by his own eloquence, committed to a partial view of life beyond the reach of correction or communication, out of which arises the tragic partiality of his actions, are derived from the symbolists. Eliot tries to express the moods of his characters through objective correlative, a term that has become Eliot's trademark. Through the use of objective correlative, he tries to bring forth what lies hidden in the psyche of the characters and feels that some external agents must be used to express the hidden inner psyche of the characters on a stage. The term objective correlative itself has the echo of symbolism. Eliot is most Eliot when not only the words but the situation stirs into life restless symbolic echoes. His characters are types and not individuals. They represent the hollowness of the upper class society and upper class people who hide everything that lies within them behind the mask of self sufficiency, smiles, teacups, etc. The ennui, the boredom, the frustration, the neurosis, the affectations are represented by him through his characters, as is evident from the following lines. Behind the decor of self sufficiency, the radius smile, the poised teacup lies the self, a mystery sometimes an illusion. The hollow men are all masks and no inside. The upper class characters in the later plays, the family reunion, the cocktail party, the confidential clerk, present social masks which they go to considerable trouble to keep furbished. Like the French symbolists, Eliot too is a symbolist in the truest sense of the word. He draws symbols from the background of literary tradition. His symbols are prosaic, poetic, grand, material, abstract, metaphysical, and spiritual. The terseness of his phrases is completely found to be in the manner of Lefort. It is a device in which phrases and quotations are highly evocative. By using such symbols, he is able to link up the present with the past, the material with the spiritual, the mortal with the immortal, the concrete with the abstract, and so on. He also says the literature of all the countries of Europe as a homogeneous whole and thus stresses upon the formation of great tradition of European literature. He frequently draws phrases from the French symbolists, especially Lafont. The Portrait of a Lady is the first Lefortian poem which was based on a real character that Eliot personally knew. It shows that he was in the habit of studying the people around him very minutely and closely, and also tried to delve deep into their psyches so that he might be able to portray their characteristics minutely and precisely. And he does this with the help of symbols. He does not make plain statements. He does not make plain statements. Rather, he suggests and connotes the images and make them vivid. Remy de Gourmont influenced Eliot the most. He was stimulated, motivated, and influenced by his critical writings. Eliot, as a critic, got profoundly inspired by Remy de Gourmont and owes his concept of multiple sensibility to him. As as is evident from the following lines by L.N. Salinger, who in his essay T.S. Eliot, Poet and Critic, writes that what is valuable and suggestive in it comes directly or indirectly from previous critics. The concept of poets amalgamating power from Coleridge, the concept of multiple sensibility from Baudelaire and Remy de Gourmont. B. Prasad maintains that it was Remy de Gourmont who, for the first time, applied the Aristotelian method of comparison and analysis to the elucidation of works of literature, and from whom perhaps Eliot borrows his famous phrase, dissociation of sensibility, the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Hugh Kenner says that the phrase do I dare disturb the universe occurs in 1881 letter of Lafont. The effect of the French symbolists, especially Baudelaire, upon him can be found in almost all writings. F. O. Matheson, in the achievement of T.S. Eliot, writes that details of Eliot's style show everywhere the mark of his responsive mastery of the later symbolists as well as of the metaphysical. The impression of Baudelaire upon his spirit has been even more profound. Eliot has experimented with symbols in his own way and has used symbols to suit his own purpose. It is the effect, that influence of the symbolists upon him, that has helped him render his vision successfully in verse without the aids of rhetoric or logical reflection and statement. What Marshall McLuhan says in this regard is worth noting. He says there is in all these works, the wasteland, the quartets, the cocktail party, a vision of the community of men and creatures, which is not so much ethical as metaphysical, and it had been in poetry due to the technical innovations of Baudelaire, Lafont, and Rimbaud that it was possible to render this vision immediately in verse without the extraneous aids of rhetoric or logical reflection and statements. Objective correlative, which Eliot formulated in his essay Hamlet and His Problems, means a set of objects, a situation, a chain of events which shall be the formula of that particular emotion, such that when the external facts which most terminate in sensory experience are given, the emotion is immediately evoked. It is a logical expression of the emotion by using external means in the form of objects, situation, or a chain of events. Eliot derives the idea of objective correlative from the symbolists. The principal innovation was that the psychological landscape in this novel the landscapes of the Ulysses. The landscapes of the Ulysses thus provide a base for objective correlative. Marshall McLuhan writes that the openings of Prufrock, Gerontian, and the Westland illustrate Mr. Eliot's growth in the adaptation of this technique as he passed from the influence of Lafont to that of Rimbaud, from personal to impersonal manipulation of experience, whereas in external landscape diverse things lie side by side. Landscape thus may be defined as a means of presenting without the copula of logical enunciation experiences which are united in existence but not in conceptual thought. So, symbolic landscape of Ulysses has played an important role in quatrains, Gerontian and the Westland. The landscape helps the places and things to utter for themselves. No description is required. A symbolical landscape itself is enough to render all that is intended by Eliot. Marshall McLuhan writes there, the effect of Laford had been to open Mr. Eliot's mind to the effects of Donne and the metaphysical. So, the effect of Rimbaud was to make him more fully aware of the means by which Dante achieved zoning states of mind through symbolic landscapes. Objective correlative thus is a means by which an uncommon idea is made common, which can very easily be comprehended and understood by the readers and the audience. The similarity between the symbolism and the objective correlative becomes apparent when one comes to know that Eliot himself is against the direct presentation of emotions in drama as well as in poetry. The symbolists try to represent the emotions through the use of symbols. It is the juxtaposition of the opposites and evocation of the particular in the particular. The juxtaposition of the opposites and evocation of the particular idea, a thought or emotion for them. Whereas for Eliot, the only way of expressing emotion in the form of art is by finding an objective correlative. So, objective correlative and symbols may be taken as the one and the same concept. For the objective, both is to evoke or connote an idea or emotion. Objective correlative, in fact, may be taken as an extension of symbols, an extension of the idea contained or inherent in symbolism. It may be said that some symbols by now have become synonymous to the thing or idea or emotion they represent, whereas objective correlative does not have any such set of evocative words or phrases which could be taken as synonymous to some particular idea or emotion in general. Objective correlative may be a chain of events that could express only one particular emotion, but only one chain of events may arouse or evoke different ideas and emotions in different people owing to their different backgrounds. But it may be reiterated symbols and correlatives are closely related to each other. Objective correlative seems to have been derived from the symbols. In other words, it may be termed as a further development and extension of symbols. As has been mentioned earlier that Eliot was profoundly influenced and impressed by Remy de Clermont, so it is generally believed that Eliot borrowed his idea of dissociation of sensibility from him. As per the Oxford Companion to English Literature, the phrase dissociation of sensibility appeared the first time in Eliot's essay The Metaphysical Poets to describe something which happened to the mind of England from the time of Donne or Lord Herbert or Cherbury and the time of Tennyson and Browning. It is the difference between the intellectual poet and the reflective poet. It implies a state when thought and feelings are not properly fused in, and the poet is unable to feel his thoughts, which results in creation of bad poetry. Uh, for writing for writing of good poetry, a unification of sensibility is required, which is a fusion or unification of feeling and thought. It is the union of opposite elements, a synthesis of thought and feeling, of individual and traditional, and of temporal and the eternal. It is the amalgamation of spiritual and material also. Since the idea of dissociation of sensibility was derived from the symbolists, it is not an original concept. Eliot just refined it, gave it a definite meaning, and used it. He finds unification of sensibility in Dante, Shakespeare, Keats, Donne, and other metaphysical poets, but finds Tennyson and Browning lacking it. According to him, dissociation of sensibility leads to creation of bad poetry and unification of sensibility of good. Eliot, in his essay Tradition and the Individual Talent, writes to divert interest from the poet to the poetry is a laudable aim, for it would conduce to a juster estimation of actual poetry, good and bad. So, Eliot is indebted to Remy de Gourmont for his concept of dissociation of sensibility. Even Ezra Pound somewhere admits that Remy de Gourmont was the man who was the inspiring and guiding force for the English symbolists. So it may be very well established that objective, correlative, and dissociation of sensibility are the terms and concepts which Eliot formulated under the influence of the symbolists. These are not his original concepts. F.O. Matheson makes an interesting remark when he says that it is no longer accurate to think of Eliot's work as a new or experimental. He has frequently borrowed ideas for his other critical concepts, and it seems that he has earned a lot of his theories by extensive reading of the past writers and critics, and after slightly modifying the thoughts and ideas, use them to suit his own purpose. Arthur Seymour's book, The Symbolist Movement in Literature, had given him a glimpse of the French symbolists, and he made full use of his study and got the ideas, impressions, and concepts imprinted upon his mind to the extent that when he started penning down his critical works, all this crept into his writings consciously or unconsciously. He did not have to labor hard for it. Impression of the French symbolists upon his mind was so profound that he himself became a part of the English symbolists movement. Ezra Pound in England has certainly played a great role in his development as a poet critic. Ezra Pound and the English symbolists made attempts to imitate the French symbolists in their writings. Matheson writes that in the years just before the First World War, the speculation of T.E. Hulme and Ezra Pound brought a new quickening of life which prepared the way for Eliot's own development. And Eliot developed substantiality. He got well versed in the use of symbols that he went to the extent of inventing his new symbol, the objective correlative. Thus, it can be concluded that Eliot's development as a poet critic owes much to the French as well as the English symbolists. His reading of Simon's book, The Symbolist Movement in Literature, and his association with Ezra Pound and through Pound, his introduction to other great writers of the time of England are the two significant events that have proved to be a turning point in this career, and he capitalized on it successfully and developed and emerged as a great poet critic of his age. It may also be added that his achievements cannot be undermined simply owing to the fact that ideas and concepts of his critical theories are not original. His greatness as a poet critic remains unaffected despite the fact that he was not an original critic, but it may definitely be said that Eliot might not have achieved all that he has achieved in his life and career as a poet critic had he not acquainted with the French and English symbolist movements. Thank you. This way, my lecture is over for today, and we shall meet again tomorrow. So, dear students, I'm very happy that you have, thank you, that you have given me a very patient hearing.